737 Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. The situation between Israel and Hamas, we all went to bed last night, thought, all right, deal's done. Now, apparently not so much. I want to welcome on into the program Victoria Coates, foreign policy analyst for the Heritage Foundation, and our guest, Victoria. I've got to ask, you've got Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Hamas has reneged on whatever deal was struck, parts of this deal, and he is accusing them of trying to renege and then get a better deal, I guess. What's the latest from your vantage point? Oh, hold on, Victoria, hold on, and go ahead. This is going to be really awkward if I can't get her. Hold on, Victoria. We're working hard to get you on the radio. And have our phones completely crashed? There we go. Victoria, now we have you. Thank you for your patience. We're going through some technical issues. So what's the latest from your vantage point?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, this was far too predictable, Dan. Hamas has been moving the goalposts for the last 15 months, ever since they started this war on October 7th, rather. And so this, the deal that was struck yesterday, a lot of people had concerns about it, about the concessions to Hamas, the restrictions that were going to be placed on Israel. But the imperative is to get as many of these hostages out right now as we can, because the grisly details are emerging about who's still alive, who isn't. That window is closing. I think that's, tremendous pressure on the prime minister, also on the president-elect, who, really, really wants to get particularly the Americans, but all of them out. And unfortunately, Israel's not just going to accept any deal. They could have had any deal, last year.
Yep.
And, they need this to be a deal that will hold their government together, and also, keep their security in place so that we don't have another October 7th.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's in a kind of a tough spot politically because obviously he needs a win. And you're right. There have been opportunities over the past year to reach a deal, and he hasn't done it. Some are saying that Netanyahu, the reason why he didn't accept these deals, I'm gonna air quote this, okay, for political reasons. Where do you stand on that assumption by some on the left who are critical of Netanyahu?
Well, I think he's the prime minister of Israel. He's always under political pressure. That's just the nature of that job. And certainly he wants to remain in office, but there's also a very strong security argument for keeping him in office right now, to keep continuity, to keep somebody very experienced. They're still in a shooting war. So, I would say you've got these three principles here: the president of the United States, the president-elect of the United States, and the prime minister of Israel. Of course, all of them are politicians. But at the same time, I would say all of them sincerely want to bring these people home. And that's probably the greatest pressure of them all. Is, you want to pay any price, but is the price of Israel's security too high? That's kind of the agonizing dilemma that we've had. And I think, as the prime minister went through the overnight last night, clearly something happened, because he had called President-elect Trump and thanked him for his assistance. And I don't think he would have done that if he hadn't been pretty confident he had a deal, but that seems to have fallen apart. So
how did these negotiations go? Is Hamas, they're a terrorist organization, right? So are they negotiating for themselves, or is there another country that is negotiating on their behalf? How does a deal fall apart like that?
Well, think about it as an elaborate game of post office, with everybody sending each other notes. And we have countries that speak to both parties, like Qatar and Egypt, who will literally be the interlocutor. They'll carry the notes back and forth. Drafts of agreements, suggestions, initiatives, that kind of a thing. And then you also have actors like Steve Witkoff, who is designated by the president-elect to be his special envoy for the Middle East, which is a position out of the State Department, but with a direct line to the Oval Office. And so Mr. Witkoff was also dispatched to the region last week, had apparently very productive meetings. According to the State Department spokesman, Matt Miller, yesterday said that Steve Witkoff's intervention was critical in moving the deal as far as it moved. So if you have the Biden administration praising him, he did a pretty good job. So that's kind of how it works. And then eventually, we hope both sides agree to a deal that will bring hostages out, but at the same time, retain Israel's security flexibility.
Victoria Coates is joining us, a foreign policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation. You mentioned the grisly news, the horrible news about the hostages, how many are alive. We may be getting body parts back. These hostages have been through a lot. Do we actually know how many are alive and how many are dead at this point? I mean, it's not like we can trust Hamas to tell us the truth.
No, and so all of this should be taken with a grain of salt. The most firm numbers I've seen is that Hamas has control of 98 of these people. Now, that leaves some dozen or 24 unaccounted for. There were horrible reports at the beginning of their captivity that Hamas was selling some of them. So the other groups may have control of that sort of undefined number of hostages. Then within that 98, we think a little over half of them are still alive. So what was designated for this first phase of the deal, if it does come to pass, is that 33 would come out, 23 of whom are alive. We think there are 3 Americans alive. 2 of them would be in that group, hopefully. And, I think that reality is what drove President Trump's very strong statements on this in early December of last year, which was really the first time you had heard American leadership speak out so forcefully to demand the release of the hostages. And I think that was the catalyst that sort of got this moving. The question is if we can get it over the goal line.
Well, you're right. I mean, everybody remembers.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is. And they should have given them back a long time. They should have never taken them. There should have never been the attack of October 7th. People forget that.
All right, so we're going to pick up the conversation with Victoria Coates coming up next. Victoria, 20-second check on traffic here in Nashville on WTN. Weather today, I have high of 49, sunny 33 now at WTN. So, Victoria, let me ask you, you heard the audio from Donald Trump. We all know what the president-elect said, all hell will break loose. Joe Biden has been incredibly weak through all of this. Now here comes Donald Trump, clearly a lot stronger. And so do you think that when Trump won the election, it really was, sort of an oh crap moment for not only Hamas, but perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu as well?
Well, I think certainly for Hamas, and that they remember him from the first term. That one of the first things we did when he came into office was turn off all the money to the Palestinian support network in terms of the NGOs, United Nations, direct economic assistance. He cut all of that off, and then started the maximum pressure campaign against their main patrons, Iran, which cut off the money from Iran. And, that had the effect of tamping down their terrorist activities during his first term. So they know that is the case. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu was also prime minister for the entirety of President Trump's first term, so they know each other well. And the prime minister, though, has much happier memories of that first term and all the things that President Trump was willing to do with Israel, culminating in the Abraham Accords. So I think the prime minister, feels very strengthened by the return of President Trump, and pleased to have somebody in the Oval Office who at least takes his calls. Apparently, he talked to President Biden a couple days ago, and it was the first time they had talked since October. Which is sort of difficult to believe. But
I was going to say my jaw just dropped. Really? I mean,
yep.
There's
just no communication.
No communication. Well, I'm not to drag you into that conversation, but Joe Biden isn't exactly a great communicator these days. Very quickly, because I'm running out of time, and this is a great conversation. So Trump comes into office. I'm assuming one of the first things that he has to do is go after Iran's economy and really enforce, maybe even throw down some new sanctions against Iran?
Well, I think the enforcement is the key thing. The sanctions architecture that was put into place in the first term is still there. All the Biden folk did was stop enforcing them and permitting the oil sales, including 1.7 million barrels a day to China that they're currently selling. So I think all you have to do is enforce those, but he'll also have to take a real hard look at the progress that's been made on their nuclear program over the last 4 years, because that has been substantial. That was not the case when he left office. And, in close consultation with Israel and our Gulf allies, decide what he's going to do about it.
One of the things, of course, with this deal is, okay, so will this have a long-term impact on making Israel safer? Because that's ultimately the question. Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to get rid of Hamas once and for all. Does this deal, in its current form anyway, even though it's in peril right now, but would this deal actually allow Hamas to continue to exist and therefore perhaps not keep Israel safe?
Well, that's going to be the $1 million question. And there is an argument to be made that if they can get at least the first phase of this deal implemented, that the United States can go to Arab partners, first and foremost Saudi Arabia, and say, look, Israel tried. Israel put a good faith, pathway to a ceasefire, to peace on the table. Hamas is the one who's vetoing this. Don't give them a veto over peace. Can you move forward with a peace deal with Israel? So you could see this as a step towards another Abraham Accord, primarily with Saudi Arabia, which would be huge and very significant to Israel's security. That would be the most hopeful look at it.
I thought this was interesting. A moment yesterday when Biden was announcing the deal.
Thank you.
Folks, credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh.
So the current president saying, is that a joke, wanting to give, Donald Trump any credit whatsoever. But, in the next 30 seconds, I think Donald Trump gets a lot of credit. And I don't know why Biden said that, because his own State Department later on said, oh, yeah, Donald Trump does get a lot of credit here.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is just the wheels coming off, and Biden grasping for any straw of a legacy he can have from his failed presidency, because I think you're 100% correct. This is all due to Donald Trump. There is nothing else that explains what changed over the last 2 weeks. This deal was more or less on the table since May. The only thing that changed was Trump.
All right. Great conversation. Victoria Coates from the Heritage Foundation, foreign policy analyst. Thank you very much. And boy, when she talks about the wheels coming off, Biden always had training wheels. And when his training wheels come off, you know that it's bad. The conversation does continue. Dan Mandis here. Here we are in 2025. What big events do you have planned? Whether it's a big corporate event, maybe a family reunion, maybe a wedding at your home. My friends at Nashville Tent and Awning can help you with an incredible enclosure that can be installed anywhere. Now, they've been around since 1884. These folks are a Nashville institution, and they've worked with the likes of the Titans, Vanderbilt, and the Grand Ole Opry. Now, they're one of the top companies in Nashville, and they can help you. Think about your backyard. You can actually extend your living space with a backyard enclosure so that you can enjoy it even here in the wintertime. If you've got an event for work coming up, they can help you there as well with a tent or an enclosure, and they've got awnings for any style of building that'll improve the look and feel of your home or office. Get some visuals and check them out at their website, NTACO.com. Tell them Dan told you to reach out at 615-329-3701. 615-329-3701. Solid craftsmanship built to last since 1884. Nashville Tent and Awning.